Okay, so what have we done so far? Well, we've covered two major problems that are broken in this conversation about serving people that live in extreme poverty. The nature of the International Development Organization, are we developing things and stuff, or are we developing people? And the nature of volunteer tourism. Are we creating programs that revolve around the needs of the communities or around the needs of the volunteers? Now let's get into the real good stuff, right? What is working? And what can we as an international community learn from, continue to do, and continue to do more of in order to bring positive results to this conversation? Okay. So what's working in international development work is human-focused development. This is development programs that put the human being first. And it's a very, very simple equation. Hang on one second. There we go. And the equation is, how can we, as a development organization, development entity, empower people so that they are better positioned to build, create, obtain, acquire the things and stuff that they need to solve their problems. We just shift that statement just a little bit, and we get a whole new approach to development work. If you look at these faces for a second, if I do, these are two pictures that I took when I was in Kenya. I see people that are strong, they have dignity, they have self-respect, they are able to work hard. They deserve the dignity to be able to be respected for the human potential that they have and supported in the process of making their lives, their families, and their communities a better place. Rather than being robbed by that dignity by a development organization coming in and saying, we have the solutions to your problems. You just show up at our truck at 4 p.m. and we're going to give you what you need. So as you can tell, I am a pretty big proponent of development work that focuses on the development of the human beings, putting them at the center of the equation. And like the previous sections, scratch what I just said. Let's just go into a story to be able to kind of see what this could actually look like. Okay. So Jerry Sternin worked with an organization called Saves the Children. And in 1990, they were allowed to go into Vietnam. Now, this is a time when Vietnam wasn't interested in a lot of NGOs coming into their organization and into their country, and for good reason, because they perceived that a lot of organizations might cause more problems than they do good. So there was a major malnutrition problem with the children of Vietnam, and Jerry Stern was basically given a pretty clear message that if you can produce like valuable results in 6 months, Save the Children can stay, and if not, you guys are out. So again, he was faced with this challenge, and how can I be able to help to alleviate the malnutrition of the children that are in this area? And what I'm so excited to report is in this condition, he focused to decide on developing people when it would have been so easy to have followed the example of so many other organizations that tried to solve malnutrition by shipping in a formula, shipping in new food, additional food, and trying to solve the malnutrition problem with things and stuff they were going to bring in. He said, you know, what if we try and focus on developing people instead? So he gathered some women together in a local community in Vietnam, and he empowered them to do a survey amongst their community on to understand which children had malnutrition in the area. So they went out and they had a scale, and they were able to measure the weight of the children. And they brought all that information back, and they all kind of sat together, and they were able to report their findings. And the question was, were there some children that were malnourished more than others? And the question is, yes, of course. So that means there were some children that were healthier than others. Yes, of course, there were. The question that he asked that was the most important one was, did you find children that were not malnourished, that were healthy, that were in some of the poorest families and poorest areas? And the answer was yes. So if there's healthy children that aren't malnourished in families that are the poorest, then we can know right with that limited information that there's local homegrown solutions to malnutrition, and we don't need an external solution. So in the desire to develop people, what did he do? he went to those homes that the survey had identified, and he found out what they did that was different than other villagers in their same community. And he found a couple things, 3 things. Number one, he found that most families served 2 meals per day, and that the families that we're going to call bright spots, the bright spots were the healthier children despite the poverty, and the bright spot families served the same amount of food, but in 4 portions rather than just 2. And what they found that malnourished children were actually better able to assimilate smaller portions than large portions, and so they were able to get more nutrients out of 4 smaller portions than 2 large portions. Pretty interesting. Next, he found out that there was an attention conversation. That the bright spot, a typical family would serve the food to the family in 1 platter. And the father and the older children and the younger children all kind of fend for themselves and get the food that they wanted to fill them up. And the assumption was that everyone would get as much as they wanted or needed. Well, in the bright spots, the young children were served separately. Served their own portion with their own attention that said, this is your food, eat this much. And what they found was that these children, while the family had the same amount of food, the children in these families were actually getting more of it because the attention of the mother set aside a specific portion for them, and they didn't have to fight against their older brothers and older sisters to get the portion. The third thing that they found was that the bright spot families used a free local supplements to add on top of the rice. So they took greens from sweet potatoes and they cut them up and they put them in the rice. And they found little shrimp that were in the rice patties and they threw those in the rice too. Things that typical families didn't think to put in food, especially for children, because they weren't assumed to be children's food. So they were able to find local, free supplements that were able to add some of the vitamins, some of the protein that the children need. So we see that the bright spots had we looked at portion, we looked at the attention, and we looked at free supplements. And we found that there were things that community members, that families, that mothers could do themselves immediately without waiting or being dependent upon any external resource to be able to improve the quality of lives of their children. And I think that we can pretty much assume that all mothers in the world want their children to be as healthy as possible. And so any mother that knew that she could do basic things that were within her power to make sure their children was going to be healthier is going to go and do it. And rather than Jerry just going out and broadcasting this message, hey, I found the solution, and passed out a prescription to the right way to be able to take care of the children, he decided it would be better to show them rather than tell them. So he took the bright spot mothers and created cooking groups so they could show their community members how they prepared meals and how that results in their children being healthier. Really, really, really simple equation. What did Jerry do? He identified bright spots, he mobilized a community, and he promoted the spread of these empowering ideas by showing. And in doing that, he was able to empower every mother in that area to be able to take the nutrition of their children into their own hands. And when Jerry left, every single one of those women were capable of doing 2 very, very important things. One, continuing to provide nutritious food for their children. And 2, being able to continue to share that information with people that Jerry was never able to meet. So when we focus on empowering people, we have a cascade of positive things that come out of that. What does it look like? Okay, let's break it down really, really simple. Empowering humans, human-focused development, means number 1, we're helping people to identify their own problems. Number 2, we're helping them to be able to discover their own solutions. And number 3, we're helping them to implement those solutions with their own available resources. And I'm going to do it again. We're going to help to identify their own problems. We're going to help to discover their own solutions. And we're going to support them in the process of implementing those solutions with their own available resources. In an even simpler way, what I'm saying is that we're supporting people to do as opposed to just doing ourselves. right? We're putting communities in a position where they can be able to say, hey, there's some things and some stuff that I need. And in that process say, great, there's some things that I can do about that. And this conversation, it takes planning, it takes skills, it takes experience to be able to do this type of work. But that's experience and skills and knowledge that's worth having if we as a global community want to be able to support communities in actually becoming empowered. What does it really look like in practical application? Essentially 4 things. Facilitation, helping community members to come together, helping to support them to have conversations about really critical issues that they're not already having. Okay? Like, nobody's going to sit around and spontaneously start a conversation about the fact that we're defecating all over our community. But you can start that conversation, and in that process, you can change that community forever. And the list goes on and on. There's a number of conversations that are not going to start out of thin air, but through a facilitation, you can help communities to talk about really critical issues. It looks like education. It looks like teaching community members certain things that they might need to know in order to be able to move forward. Like, for example, teaching them that, that the flies can land on their defecation, carry this microscopic disease onto their food, and when they ingest it, they're going to get sick. That's knowledge and information that with that knowledge and information, they become extremely empowered to be able to make valuable decisions moving forward. Next, adding some type of skills. If this community member, they understand that they want to be able to not have their defecation out and exposed, but they don't know how to build a latrine, then teaching community members and helping them to figure out the process of how to construct a latrine out of their own local materials and their own local resources. Or the list goes on. How to be able to do the things that are going to be required to do in order for them to take their future in their own hands. And the last is connecting. It's helping community members to become connected to themselves, community leaders to be connected to communities, communities to be connected to each other, communities to be connected to government agencies and other organizations. And in the process of helping to make these connections, we're going to be able to see the availability of a lot of resources and energy and value that can be added into the poverty alleviation conversation. So what does empowering humans really look like? We facilitate, we educate, we train, we connect. Okay? And if you look closely, you can see me and a blackboard in Western Kenya teaching this village about the difference between internal and external locus of control. And when they understood philosophically what had been happening as a result of the other NGOs that had worked in that area for years before, they were so pissed. They were so pissed. And everywhere I go, I teach people, this is internal locus of control, this is external locus of control. What if previous development projects, how have they affected your community members? The answer always is external locus of control, and they're pissed that they let it happen. And now they're able to stand for themselves, and they're educated to say, like, we don't want your project anymore. Because your project, and I'll tell you, this is a direct quote from the chief from Northern Kenya where I was working. Once we taught this principle to her, it was the only female chief in all of Kenya. Once we taught this principle to her and to her supporting staff, they said, regarding the organization that put in those porta potties and other projects that have been done, they've turned us into beggars. Right? So, if we want to be able to be a part of this movement, then we not only have to be able to shift our development work to be more human focused, but we also have to recognize that we're stepping into a lot of momentum that's going in the other direction. And it takes a lot of energy to be able to stop a rock that's already rolling down a hill. But we can do it. Okay. What are the results of development work that's focused on developing people rather than things? Community members are able to gain knowledge and skills. This knowledge and skills are able to live within them. There's no dependencies that are created. The community members, they have the knowledge, they have the skills, they have the leadership capacity, and they're left with organizational structures that can help them to move forward. They're able to continue to improve their conditions. So when we distribute something, then as soon as we stop distributing that thing, when we teach and empower a person to be able to solve their problem, then after we leave, they can continue to solve that problem. Not only that, but we prepare them to face new challenges head on. Not only by teaching them how to be able to solve their present challenges, but teaching them about the problem-solving process allows them to then look at other areas in their life and say, we were able to solve this problem, what else can we solve? Because now we know the process of looking for bright spots, of figuring out what they're doing, of replicating it, and of sharing that information. And we can look at that in nutrition, we can look at that in other types of disease prevention, we can look at that in malnutrition, we can look at that in water purification, and the list goes on and on and on. We teach community members processes so they can be able to attack other challenges head on. Mention that. And what's another biggie? Well, it puts us in a position where there's no dependencies that are based upon the outside organization. And that's really important and that's really amazing. And I want to share with you a personal story about a program that I was involved with, again in Western Kenya. Most of the development work I've done is there. And like many organizations, we have the thought, we want to build a school. Okay, now this was grounded off of the community also recognizing they wanted to build a school. But we stepped in and we went into that, we're going to build things and stuff mode. Okay, so we raised money here in America, we had our fundraising campaigns, all that kind of stuff. And over several years, we built this school. We built the building, and we also went to the next step. You know, we hired the staff, we registered the school with the local government, we recruited students. So we did a lot of the work to put an effective school in place. This school runs today with about 150 students. It's self-managed and self-run, and the fees that come in from the students pay the overhead of this school, so it's sustainable and there's no dependencies on our organization. That sounds like a success story. That's pretty cool. I'm proud of that effort. And knowing what I know now, what I've learned over the last 3 years about the difference between developing things and stuff versus developing people, I never would have built that school in the first place if I could go back in time. Because if we would have taken the resources and the manpower that it took to create that school and we put that into supporting other schools in that area, we would have been able to impact more lives for good. We could be able to support the management, teacher training, help the schools to get the materials and resources that they need. And we could have probably, with what we did here, we could have probably served 10 schools in the surrounding area and had greater impact if we would have focused on developing people rather than just developing things and stuff. And here's the last one. It's my favorite one. You guys know what I'm going to get to. Do you know what I'm going to get to? In the process of developing people so that they can be able to identify their own problems, discover their own solutions, and implement those solutions with their own available resources. We have to shift the locus of control. We have to shift it to be more internal so that they now become positioned to have the thought process, wow, there's things in my life that I want to change. There's things in my family and my community that I want to be different. And because I just did that one thing successfully, I can probably do the other thing too. And we see community members that get off the apathetic bench and start to become very proactive change agents in their community as a result of being involved in programs that helped to develop them and help to position them to be successful and help them to feel the sweet experience of being able to serve their fellow community members. Okay. What does this type of work look like? It can look like all different things. It can look like sanitation improvement, literacy improvement, agricultural development, business development, women's empowerment, women's health improvement, energy and electricity. And the list goes on and on. And that's not even the most important part, because it all pretty much looks the same. It all looks like mobilizing community members, educating, training, and connecting. And we can use these specific mechanisms which correspond to those roots that we talked about earlier to help to be able to solve their direct problems. And use these topics as ways to get our foot in the door, to help to teach them correct principles and correct processes to identify their own problems, discover their own solutions, and implement those solutions with their own available resources. I'll tell you one story about a program that we were involved with. This is an electricity program, okay? Like so many other organizations, we recognize the need in this community was they didn't have access to electricity. Electricity is huge if families can be able to have it. Women can be able to cook with a light which can help to be able to cook more hygienically. Children can be able to read at nighttime, even though they've been working in the farms. They can actually become literate and carry out their schooling under artificial light. So many valuable things can come when community members can have access to electricity. And what do most development organizations do? Even ones that are really sustainable and green and forward-thinking, they're going to look at solar. But a lot of these programs are going to focus on, even though solar is cool because it's like sustainable and like we're getting electricity from the sun and that's really cool, we're still focused on developing things and stuff. We still find the school or the community center or the health clinic, we put on a solar system there, and we feel really great about ourselves, the fact that we were able to electrify this community. We didn't electrify a community. We electrified one building. And how are people going to benefit from that building? Probably not very much. What happens if rather than electrifying a building, we focus on developing people to be able to address their own energy needs? And so this is the question that we asked when we developed this program. What do? First, we traveled to some neighboring cities and found out where we could actually find and buy small-scale solar equipment. And we found them. There were some shops in some cities that were not more than 50 or 60 miles away that sold the equipment that community members would need to be able to have a small solar panel in their homes, that could go to a small battery, that could light a light bulb, that could change their lives. Not only did we find the equipment, but we found out how much it cost, and we got contact information from the distributors and all that pertinent information. We also were able to network into a local that knew how to wire all this stuff together. His name was Peter. I'm sorry for the dark picture. So we got our hands on Peter, and we sat Peter down and we said, "Hey, Peter, we've got this idea. We would like for more of your community members to know how to be able to access electricity so they can change their lives. And we think that there's something that you can do to help to change their lives. Are you interested?" Peter had just been a contractor. He knew how to wire things together. He wasn't a people person. He didn't have any experience whatsoever teaching or educating or leading or anything like that. So he was a little bit overwhelmed. But we encouraged him and helped him to understand that we were going to support him in this process, and so he said, okay. So together, we actually developed a curriculum that he would be able to teach his fellow community members on how they would be able to access solar equipment, install it, and then use electricity to change their lives. And imagine the process of somebody who just saw himself as the type of person that knew how to wire a panel to a battery, and as his own self-perception was shifting, and thinking that he could actually be involved in influencing. He could actually be involved in supporting his community. He could be a leader and a teacher and an educator. It was really exciting to see this transformation happen in Peter. You know, this was the day before we started our workshop. We stayed up all night long, and we put together this demonstration. So we were going to be able to show the community members exactly how all the different equipment works. This is us working together. Proudly taking a group of community members that might, I add, paid to be able to come to this workshop. We weren't just giving it away for free. We were saying that this is something that's going to be valuable for you. And if you want in, then you have to show proof that you're serious. And so the contribution was just, it was a small amount, but they still had to put something out of pocket. And how much different is that than an organization that comes in and says, let me pay you money so that we can install this porta potty in your backyard? Versus, we have something valuable to offer. It can change your life. How about you put something on the table so that we know that you're serious? So they all paid to be a part of this workshop. And it was a 3-day workshop. And Peter taught them not only all about how the equipment worked and where they could be able to buy it, but we also taught them how they could use electricity to change their lives. And most importantly, I believe most importantly, we taught them how they could be able to create a savings plan so that every week they could save a little bit of money. And after about 18 months or 24 months, they would have enough money to be able to buy their own equipment, install their own system, electrify their own home, and change their family's lives forever. And so this was a picture of some of our graduates from the solar education, and it was really fun to be a part of it. And what did we do here? We helped to identify interest, we trained trainers, we supported community mobilization, we focused on skills sharing, skills that were already available, that in the sharing of those skills could result in a positive change in the community. There was zero financial support given from our organization, and most importantly, the focus was on developing people. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at, let's get some conceptual for a second here. Remember how on the last slide we or on the volunteer tourism slide, we put, actually I'm just going to show you real quick. We put all the, we put all development organizations into 2 different categories. Those that focus on carrying out effective programs and those that focus on allowing volunteers to have experiences. Okay, let's go back for a second and let's actually create 2 categories but with a different axis. And let's create this category of organizations that focus on developing things and stuff, and then organizations that focus on developing people. Okay, so we're going to take all organizations, we're going to put them in 1 or 2 categories. They either focus on developing things and stuff that we think will meet the needs, or we're going to focus on developing people so they can meet their own needs. And let's combine that model with the previous model. And what we're going to get is a very, very simple matrix, which we'll be able to use to look at any organization or any activity to be able to verify its efficacy and how it's going to actually result in the communities that it plays out towards. And that's this simple model. And let's just look at it for a second here, okay? We've got 4 different categories. We've got, in this left-hand side, we've got organizations that are focused on having volunteers have an experience, which are helping to bring in things and stuff. Or a better situation of organizations that are focused on volunteers that are helping to train and educate, okay? Down here, we've got the focus on things and stuff, and then over here we've got programs that are focused on creating things and stuff. And so at least over here they're focused on the programs, but they've kind of got the program side of it wrong. At least they're not doing all their work to facilitate a volunteer to have a positive experience. What do we see in the upper right-hand corner? We see the sweet spot. We see organizations that A, they're focused on carrying out effective programs. They might not have any volunteers at all, or if they do, then it's a rigorous application process because they're not willing to have anyone but the best person in place. They don't care about making money from volunteers come in because they want to do effective programs. That's their priority. And they're focused on developing people. And it's in that quadrant that we're going to find the real development work that's going to be able to empower people and have sustainable results. And if you guys are sitting right here thinking, I want to be able to get involved as a volunteer overseas, or I want to be a part of this industry, well, I challenge you to get up into this quadrant. And you're not going to get up there by making 1 phone call. You're going to have to prove to this organization that's focused on developing good programs that you have some value to add. Because why else would they bring you? Because their priority is not you. Their priority is a program. And why would you want to plug into an organization that's purporting to do community development work and you're the center of that equation? That's backwards. And if we want the community to be at the center, then we have to add value to ourselves so that we can actually make that phone call or send that email and say, I've got some value to add to support that project. Can I come and volunteer in your program? So typically, we're going to have to become educated ourselves. We're going to have to become trained ourselves. And we're going to have to get our way into that quadrant so we can do the work that every volunteer tourist wants to do. And that's work that's going to create a positive impact. And if we're a movement that are helping to be able to create real results for people that are living in extreme poverty, then what that means is not only do we have to put ourselves there, but it means that we have to be able to step up and help the whole equation to shift to get up there. We have to do what we can do to support the organizations that get this volunteer-centric model and say, hey, how about your programs? What's the result in the communities? And we have to have conversations with the organization that are saying, we're just going to develop things and stuff, and say, how about the people? What if we develop people? And if we attract the conversation from this side and from this side, and we help to say, look, you're not bad, you're not wrong, you're not a bad person for doing the type of work that's not creating sustainable impact, but you could probably do something better. Would you guys like to be able to do better work so that the effort and the money and the energy and the volunteers and all this stuff can actually have something positive to show for it 5 years down the road? And a large majority of the organizations out there, they don't know this quadrant, they don't understand it. They're stuck here or here or here. They've got great intentions, they've got great aspirations, and they just haven't quite gotten it all together to be able to develop really effective programs. But conversations that you can have with your friend or with your neighbor or with your professor or with your fellow student can help to shift this And it might not happen tomorrow, but what happens if we have 100 people out having this conversation, writing blog posts, writing articles, making videos, proliferating this message? What if that 100 is 1,000? What if that 1,000 is 10,000? Do you think that we have what it would take to actually make some shifts? And what would the result of those shifts be? Remember Jacobia? The shifts would be that we would help to be able to save lives. We would help to be able to change lives. We could actually say that our generation wants to be able to end extreme poverty and not just be blowing hot air, because we actually know what brings valuable results. Okay? So we've talked about what's working. Okay? Human-focused development. It's the minority. It's the drastic minority, but it's out there. There's organizations that are doing it effectively. I've been doing my best to implement it. There's a number of organizations that have implemented it a lot longer than I have and a lot better than I have. And we're doing our best. And we need the rest of the industry to join us in doing work that's focused on developing people. And in this last section, we're going to go into the final component that's going to give you an overview on how to be able to carry out this type of work practically, what it would take to do, and the things that you would have to learn yourself if you wanted to actually be involved with implementing human-focused development work. And I can't wait to share that with you. But before we go there, are there any questions or comments on this last section? Please.
Have you found any resistance from communities trying to implement these types of programs?
Absolutely. And that resistance is evidence of the classical conditioning that's been done by the organizations that have preceded ours. So if 10 organizations in a row show up and say, we have things and stuff that we want to give you, and I show up and I'm empty-handed, they're saying, WTF, mate, where's our things and stuff? We're used to, we come, you give us something, we walk away, and we smile and whatever. If you want us to sit through a workshop, we'll sit through it, and then we'll get the thing and stuff afterwards. And we're empty-handed. And we have a resistance every single time on the front end. And all I have to do is teach them that model of internal versus external locus of control. In a development situation, I simplify that even further to what I call a strong mind versus a weak mind. Once they get that model, no resistance left over. And anyone that does provide resistance, the other community members snuff it out. As soon as somebody says, but aren't you going to pay us something for coming to this workshop? Or when are you going to give us that thing? The other communities are like, didn't you get the thing about the what's happened and what we're doing and this is different, and then it just takes care of itself. So, does that answer your question? Cool. Let's take Chris in the back.
Yeah, invariably you're up against a certain amount of resistance just on the basis. For example, and I'm not saying Peter would be one of those people, but here you're asking Peter to teach other people to do what he's been paid to do. Something that's his livelihood.
Totally.
How do you recognize that and work with it?
It's an opportunity for Peter in two ways. And that's a great question, by the way. I appreciate that question. And that was a question that we always had to ask ourselves as well. And there's two answers. One, none of these people would have picked up the phone and hired Peter before. Because we're talking about a small scale project that requires a small panel, a small battery, and a light bulb. What he had done is worked on like schools and churches and health clinics and stuff like that. What it is doing is it's creating awareness in an area that didn't have very much solar power about how solar power could be valuable, which is going to increase the probability that one of these larger institutions is going to be like, hey, we want that. And these community members do not have the skill sets to be able to go in and wire a 400-watt solar panel, right? So then it's actually creating more business awareness for what he can do. And more people are knowing what his skills are. Furthermore, Peter, remember, I appreciate the question because you're bringing up a point that I failed to mention, which is when I told you that the community members paid for that workshop, where do you think that money went? The money went to Peter. Peter got paid as an educator to be able to teach his community members. So what did we show Peter? There's actually a business of teaching and training, and he can be able to travel to community. That was one community in an area that has hundreds of communities. And now he recognized that he's got an additional marketable skill.